doing a bit.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Let's Talk Stories. We are back with another episode, and today we have a special guest. The first time ever I get to have a guest that I invited, so I'm very happy about it. But we have Jessica here with us today, a writer, and what else do you do, Jessica?
Man, well, I don't go into that too much. So I am an author, publishing my first book this June, actually.
Awesome.
And then I also I'm an intuitive business consultant.
Very
so
nice.
I work with small business owners and entrepreneurs and helping them grow their businesses.
Love it. Love it. And then we have the usual. We have Jaylon.
Hello.
And then we have...
Hello there. Great to see you there. I was just reading the second of the Making of Star Wars trilogy by J.W. Rinsler, The Making of Empire Strikes Back. Yes, I know it's the second one. The first one I have is lost in storage right now. I couldn't get it right now, so I apologize. Also, Jessica, that's very, very cool to hear what you do. I did hear you. That was quite cool.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to talk to you guys today.
I'm contributing my space buns for the Star Wars theme. That's about it.
Why didn't I think about doing some Princess Leia hair?
I was going to dress up or something. I thought about it and then I was like, oh, no, I don't have the motivation.
I have a lightsaber around here somewhere.
I do have my lightsaber.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I get it?
Yes.
You should.
It's the wrong movie.
I have a lightsaber around here somewhere. It is buried.
This is my favorite lightsaber that I got for Christmas, which is Obi-Wan's Phantom Menace lightsaber, which has always been my favorite. It is beautiful, and I love it. That ball right there.
You are going to make all of my brothers so jealous.
Yeah.
I am not I'm not a good fan when it comes to all this because I Charles has a little box and he puts his thing. Mine's is literally under a pile of books somewhere, and I would be the worst Jedi of all time. I fully admit that. I do, however, have the Sith and the Jedi guidebook around here. Also around here somewhere. Anyway, in case you didn't know by now, we are talking about Star Wars today. And so we are talking about A New Hope, specifically around the theme of the hero's journey. For those who are not familiar with the hero's journey, I don't have a proper context to put it in other than it is just an interesting and very old way of telling stories by Joseph Campbell, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's my mentor. My filmmaking mentor hates Joseph Campbell with a passion and has told me that I am not allowed to believe in anything that he says. He didn't say that exactly, but he didn't say that to be exact. But his whole thesis is proving that the monomyth is not the only way to tell stories, which is true. But that's not the point. Today we are talking about that version of storytelling. And so if you ever feel like your protagonist's journey is missing something, maybe there's an arc that feels a bit predictable, or you feel like they never really change, this is the episode for you. So we're going to talk that out. I know you said you listened to a few of our episodes, so you know how most of this stuff goes. I'm just going to throw questions at you guys. We're going to talk about the story, what you guys think about it, the movie itself, as well as just the hero's journey and how it works. Jess, I know you said you've studied the hero's journey a little bit. So I want you, before we jump into that, if you want to talk a little bit about your thoughts on the hero's journey, how you came into contact with it, and what exactly it is to you.
Yeah. Well, I love Joseph Campbell, and I love the hero's journey. Mildly obsessed with it, actually. So I first read Joseph Campbell's book, Hero with a Thousand Faces. He wrote it in 1949. I read it about 10 years ago. Basically what it does, it shows us that this story, this character arc is really what the hero's journey is, has been being told for hundreds, possibly thousands of years in human civilization, that it's just this, through myth, through literature, and now through movies, that it's this powerful character journey. I think the reason that it's been told so many times and continues throughout our history is because it really speaks to our personal journeys, our personal, our speaks to our souls. It really is all about overcoming obstacles, finding meaning in life, becoming a better person. And so it really starts off, in what's the first step, the ordinary world, where you're just living, and then it takes your characters on this grand journey where you become this changed person at the end. So I absolutely, like I said, love the hero's journey. In the book that I've written that's going to be out soon called Woven in Time, is actually I have three main characters, and they go through the hero's journey in this book, each one of them. But then I also have, it's a 3-book series planned out, and they have an overarching hero's journey across all 3 books. And then there's kind of a, hopefully not too much of a spoiler, but a little bit of a hero's journey from my first character in the third all the way through my third character in the twins. A giant overarching hero's journey. So it's really the hero's journey like fractalized in story form, and I just love it as story arc and a character journey of growth.
Very nice. I think you touched on something that I've always said about the hero's journey. I think I said this to Jaylon not that long ago, as well as another one of our mentor and, you know, our company's godfather, if you will, Eric. When I've talked about the hero's journey I think you're right that it connects with us as human beings so well, because each and every one of us goes through a hero's journey in almost every aspect of our. Oh no, it's all good. I have a dog over here that stunk me out last week, if everybody remembers. So no worries. But yeah, like it's the thing that connects. It's the thing about human beings, the experiences that we go through, everything that we go through is in fact a hero's journey. If you really think about it, every decision we make is us moving towards these little narratives. And so I think that's that's the coolest thing about the hero's journey, is how much it kind of feels like life in a grand scheme of things. And I think that's awesome. It helps me to get through some of the harder moments in my life when I start to think about, oh no, this is just the dark night of the soul type of, you know what I mean? And so I'm due for an epic climax and it's going to be awesome. So let's just for it. So now that we kind of have a general idea of what the structure overall is, the question I ask you guys is, do you feel, and I guess this kind of flies in the face of my mentor, but do you feel that this structure is a universal thing? Do you think that all stories need it to succeed or not?
I'm going to say, because I have seen so many stories that have a very similar, they have very similar DNA. Like the hero's journey in general, meaning your protagonist going on a journey in order to grow and facing obstacles that force them to grow, is something that I think is present in every story in a different way. But going through each of the exact steps, I don't think you need every single one in every story, but I've seen a lot of stories that have endured over time follow most, if not all, of these steps. So there is something to say for, this is a structure that's written into our DNA, and stories are very old, and the stories that speak to our souls endure time. They transcend time, they transcend civilizations, cultures. So there's something to say for the good stories endure and can be applicable to so many different people in so many different places. But I have seen successful stories, as long as your character is forced to grow in some way, shape, or form, and they encounter obstacles that do force them to grow and test them, I think that that's the hero's journey DNA that is in every story.
Yeah, I think you don't need not every single story needs to follow any formula. That's just like out the door. Because if that's the case, you get just repetition again and again and again and again and again. But I think what's interesting too about that is that in that sense, the kinds of material that come out with stories is really malleable. So for example, the thing that kind of popped in my brain as you were saying that, Jaylon, is that Spirited Away from Studio Ghibli is a story more or less, or in a nutshell, a girl who gets trapped in servitude in a Japanese spirit bathhouse, right? That's the whole thing. Hayao Miyazaki, the writer and director of the film, said in his mind it was an adventure film, right? Something akin to Raiders of the Lost Ark, or what also Miyazaki did, Castle in the Sky. But you look at that movie and you go, well, that's not an adventure film. But if you look on the technical details of it, it is an adventure film. So the whole kind of, not necessarily genre, but styling can change all the time. So like Jaylon said, it shouldn't be the same pattern again and again and again. But the DNA always kind of scatters itself between several different details. It's the same reason I've heard people say like Jumanji, right? The movie, the 95 movie. For me, that was like one of the first horror movies I saw. But it's not a horror movie technically. But that's because all those kind of stylings come through. So it's the same with the hero's journey. You can find the patterns through everything, but you don't need to follow it strictly, especially if you make up something new. for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with, like, you don't actually have to have, and maybe, you know, it's been done before, like, you shouldn't have to have them go on a physical journey, you know, to a faraway land, but it could, like in Spirited Away, which I love Studio Ghibli, but yeah, she just goes to this other world, like it really is a whole other world from where she was, and that is a journey in itself because she comes back changed. And so, like, you know, some of my favorite ones, like I love Moana because that is such a hero's journey, you know, and she does go on a physical journey. That is a very much like more true representation of the hero's journey. But I do think any good story, there's going to have character development and that character arc, but it doesn't have to follow the hero's journey to a T to be a good story.
I think you guys are right. I agree. I agree with that completely. I think the hero's journey has this whole thing too where it's kind of like, or it feels like, there's this idea that the character themselves has to change. It doesn't always have to be for the better, doesn't always have to be good. But I would even argue that movies and stories like, for instance, The Hunger Games are a little bit different from the hero's journey because Katniss Everdeen, if you really watch, specifically the movies, I haven't read the books, so I don't know how, you know, how one-to-one they are to one another. But in the movies themselves, Katniss Everdeen doesn't really change all that much. It's the society around her that changes because of it. And so another example, the one that my mentor gave me when he was talking about how the monomyth isn't in every story, is Boys in the Hood. Boys in the Hood is another example of how the main character doesn't necessarily change, but the world around them does change to reflect it. Even though technically the world around them in Boys in the Hood doesn't really change all that much either. They're all still kind of screwed up at the end. But nonetheless, that's an interesting, that I think that only proves the point that we don't always have to stay rigid in our structural design of our stories. I like structure. I like order, which is weird because when I was growing up, I did not. I hated it. My mother, if my mother ever listens to this podcast, she won't. But if she ever does, the first thing she would say is, "Who is this person?" Because she literally always was like, you know, we need to have a schedule and an order and outlines for everything. And I was like, no, I like chaos. And now I'm like, you know, no. I need lists. I need outlines, and I need structure. So formula, I don't think is always bad. I think when that's the thing that you lean into, that's when it kind of becomes problematic. You have to find a bit of your own sauce, I guess, that you can add to it to make it interesting. That makes me ask this question. How do you balance structure with originality? How do you bring this, if we're using the hero's journey, how do we use that, but then bring our own secret sauce to it that keeps it from being just a formulaic paint by numbers thing?
By putting a Bionicle in your Castle Grayskull playset. Bear with me with this metaphor.
Okay.
What I mean is that you take something, you find the formula, you see what you do, and you go, okay, what can we do different? What hasn't been done before? But also, what do you want to say? So I think if you start, and I used to do this all the time when I was young, as everyone does, right? As everyone who's making up stories when they're young does. They take the most popular thing at the time right now. So I can't remember what was on at the time or what I was reading at the time when I was making up stuff. But you take the most popular thing and you just do it your own. But you're not really doing your own. You're just changing the character from a blonde to a brunette. You're changing their name from John to Jack. That's all you're really doing when you're like, I'm going to follow the formula and here's my story. But if you follow what you want to say, what you want to do, you infuse that into the formula. So what I'm saying is that if you using the old Masters of the Universe toys, right? Here's Castle Grayskull. You only put, is it the Enchantress? I cannot remember her name. The lady in Castle Grayskull. You put your other He-Man toys, and that's it. But a child isn't going to do that. I speak from experience. You don't put those toys in there. You put your toys, your little Play-Doh figures, your friggin' utensils from the kitchen if you wanted to, right? And you create an entirely different story, an entirely different playset. It's the same thing with that. You can balance a formula, but maybe they don't have to lose their parents, or they don't have to go on a huge journey, or the character has a mental health condition, or they have a physical ailment. And once you start building from there, suddenly the formula is just kind of one brick in this giant house that you've made by the end of it. That's kind of the go-to thing that I would say, if that makes sense.
I could share my thoughts, but I feel like it's been so long since I have created stories myself. I loved writing, loved storytelling when I was very, very young. So like the very first story that I ever like wrote by hand in my fuzzy notebook at like 9 years old was very much like what Charles was saying. It was just a retelling of the childhood books that I was really into. However, I feel like it was very easy for me to come up with like a whole story from my imagination, and I hated writing outlines. I was like, I know what I want to say, just let me say it. And taking time to write outlines really drove me up the wall. Like whether it was for an essay or whether it was for a creative story I was working on, whatever it was, I hated it. Something that I found helpful though was when I had that story I wanted to tell, once I found what I wanted to say, then I would try and fit it into a formula and say, okay, let me make sure I have all these puzzle pieces and I'm connecting them in a way that makes sense. There's also something to say for a lot of times outlines are really great, formulas are really great for getting you started. Using our specific branded formula that Oba uses, I really appreciate it because it allows you to have, it starts with the why, it starts with what you want to say and why. And then once you have your purpose, then it gives you the stepping stones for, okay, let's brainstorm all these different puzzle pieces that need to exist. But you can always go back and erase and put new things in, find new things that work, because there's also something to say for the creative process. As you write, as you get to know your characters, they become more real. And a lot of times they start making decisions all on their own that you didn't give them permission to make. And then they start going down a totally different path that you never planned on, but it just feels more right. So leaving room for that creative process, for your subconscious to really take over, is so key. And so I appreciate the formulas that give you the necessary puzzle pieces, but also say, like, as your story evolves, you can go back and connect new threads and find new ways to tie those threads so that it makes an even better story.
I was actually just going to say, so like when I wrote my book, it was very similar to what you were just saying, Jaylon, is that, so like I had, so when my book honestly started playing like a movie in my head. I had all these like scenes coming in and I was like, oh my gosh, I should probably write this down. So I had like all of these sticky notes and I like had them all spread out like all over the ground. And I'm like, okay, here's a scene, here's a scene, here's a scene. And I have all of these things and I'm like, okay, like how does this fit together? And I think that's where like a story arc like the hero's journey or a 3-act structure or whatever, you know, you want to go with, like helps you put those pieces together and sees like maybe where you're missing something, where that makes the most sense. But yeah, like really the story is you, just like your box of toys, like that is still you and it's still going to be unique because no one else can tell that story like you can. But I think a structure like the hero's journey just gives you the framework for making sure you're hitting those story beats that make sense and resonate with people on a deeper level because, you know, I mean, again, it's been around for hundreds or thousands of years. It resonates with people, that pattern, but the actual story is going to be unique and uniquely your own. So I think, yeah, whether it's an inward, you know, I think you can have a lot of movies have an inward hero's journey. I think about like, I love V for Vendetta is one of my favorite movies. Totally. And that's a very like inward hero's journey that the character goes through. But then you can also have an outward hero's journey as well. So it's like it's all up to the author to decide, you know, how your character goes through this arc. And like I have book 2 planned out for my book series. And in book 2, Woven in Time, one of my characters goes on what I would call an anti-hero's journey.
Nice.
So I really take the hero's journey concept and like flip it on its head. And what would that look like to kind of descend as opposed to grow? So that'll be fun to write.
I love that.
It sounds fun. That's my favorite. That is my favorite story. I'm a little melancholic masochist. I love anti-heroes. I love tragic stories where people go from being good, hopeful human beings to being devastated people who are just broken. I'm terrible, but I do enjoy it. So I like that. But I agree with everything you guys said about how to add your own little flavor to it. I know I have a very specific system to creating stories and the way that I do it. It's very matter of fact. I don't usually deviate from it, and I think you could probably tell when you read my stories that it's that way. But I don't know if I think my style of doing it is probably an amalgamation of all the different things I've learned over the years of telling a story. And so you just kind of, I think when you're telling your own stories, there's a lot of stuff out there. There's you have the Save the Cat, you have the Joseph Campbell, you have all of these different people out there with all these different ways, John Truby, all these different people telling you how to effectively tell a story. And there's nothing inherently wrong with any of them. I think the best thing you can ever do is take it all in and then pick what works for you and your story and then do that.
So
I know
true.
how easy it is to get, at least for me, it's been hard. I still struggle with it to you hear the gurus or the whatever tell you, this is how you tell a story. And then you're just like, okay, I'm going to take that idea and then I'm going to flip whatever I'm doing and I'm going to add it to this because that's what they say I have to do. And then you just find yourself sort of chasing the newest thing that everybody's telling you to do. And then your story no longer looks like your story. Now it's just like a bunch of other stuff from a bunch of different places. And I've had to start over from page one because I've gone down the rabbit hole of oh, well, Joseph Campbell said I needed to do this. And what's his name? Harmon said I needed to do this. And now it's this is not my story. This is all of their story and just my characters. And so find out who you are, find out what you want to start with. And I think that's why our outline works so well. When you do start with your why, when you do know why you're writing it and you know who you're writing it for, suddenly planning the kind of story you're trying to tell becomes a little bit easier. All that said, let's get into actual Star Wars. Let's,
It feels like a sentence. Talk about Star Wars. Just been waiting here.
So for Luke, what would you say? What makes a good ordinary world for a hero? Specifically, Luke, what made his ordinary world work so well for him? What do you guys think?
He was tired of it. Because anyone, no matter how crazy the world is, whether you have 2 moons setting in the night, whether you have alien species, whether you're farming moisture, no matter how crazy your world is, if your character lives in it, they're probably tired of it because they don't realize how crazy it is because that's all they know. So I think in a lot of books, the ordinary world, that step of the hero's journey, is either where a character has become comfortable and apathetic, or tired of being there and just itching for more and just wanting to get out like Luke was.
I think another really interesting thing that I always really loved, even as a little kid, is what Aunt Beru tells Uncle Owen. She says most of his friends are gone. Now, there was a whole different cut of this movie where, and you can listen to some of the material in the old NPR radio plays, where Luke had other friends he was hanging out with, and his friend that's at the end of the movie, Big Starklighter, one of the X-Wing pilots, meets up with him again and goes, I'm going to leave the Empire for the Rebellion. That's gone. And I think that's brilliant because I always had this sense that Luke was alone. There's he's in the boondocks of nowhere. And I always thought it was very interesting that there was a sense of loneliness, of this kind of desolation that he was in, and he just wanted to feel a sense of not kind of being lonely, which is why Han and Leia and Chewie and 3PO and R2 become so important to him, and he makes really rash decisions in the second one for that reason. It's also an interesting detail too, and I'm not going to get too much into this, but something I always found fascinating was Luke was so desperate to get out of this place, he was going to join the fascist academy, the Imperial Academy. It took me years to figure that out. I was like, he must be talking about in a different academy. No, he's talking about the Imperial Academy. That's where his friend went. But it shows how desperate he is to feel like he belongs somewhere amongst people, amongst something, that he's willing to not only join a fascist entity, but also violence. So something that he asks 3PO when he learns that 3PO is with the rebellion, he says, have you seen much action? Which is, exactly the thing that a young boy who's never seen violence would say.
Yep.
And I always thought that was very interesting that it's a mixture of his longing for action, or his longing for violence, but as Small Soldiers once said, don't call it violence, call it action, as well as his just sheer sense of loneliness and desolation of that Tatooine. That's how I always viewed it, and I find that very striking compared to, say, I don't know, pick one. There's a ton of stories like this that don't do it as well.
Yeah, I think one of the other defining features of the ordinary world is just the idea that people are just living on autopilot, kind of in an unconscious, we're just existing, the daily grind, you're just doing the things that you're doing. You don't really know why or question them. That's defining. But then what defines the hero in our story, and this is where you get clued in, who's the main character, right? Is you have Luke, who's there's gotta be something else out there. There's gotta be more to life than living on this desert planet, farming, like with my, like there has to be something more, right? And that's like where, like what primes the hero for their adventure, for their journey is like they're ready, maybe, and like, you know, they might go down the wrong path and join the army, you know, the Federation, you know, but like they're primed and ready for that message, for the call to action, which is the next step.
Yes.
That's fascinating. That's interesting. So yeah, I'll be honest, because you know me, guys. I'm the transparent master. I'm just kidding. No,
We
but
love
I am.
you for it.
No, but I didn't watch the movie. To be fair, it wasn't. Charles,
You already
don't hit me,
bashed Harry
Charles.
Potter. I'm not dealing with this.
No, it's not. No, it's not that I've never seen the movie. I've seen the movie many a times. I didn't watch it this time because circumstances would not allow me to do it this particular time. But
I
I've
thought
seen
you were
the
going to
movie.
say something negative, like
No, I will never say anything negative about the original trilogy. I will never talk bad about that. I like living.
these ITs continue.
But no, so it's been a long time since I've seen it, but I remember it. It's one of those things that has been in my head rent-free since I was like yay high, which I don't know why I made that reference. You guys aren't here. But the point is, since I was a child, I've been, you know, a big Star Wars fan. And I have such fond memories of Star Wars, specifically this film. My brother and I would get our Nerf bats. He would have a red one, I'd have a blue one, and we would beat each other. And that would be our thing. And so, but one of the things I bring that up to say that Luke, I never liked Luke in general. I love Star Wars. I love A New Hope, and I loved all the characters. I love Ben. I loved Obi-Wan so much. He was my favorite character in the whole thing. But Luke has always bothered me until I became an adult. And then I started to realize, oh no, that's what life is like. Because when you're a kid, you know how like, you know, life is filled with possibility. There's hope. Tomorrow is awesome. Everything's going to be great. Even when you have a shitty day, even when you have a bad, whatever, in the next hour or whatever, so many cool things can happen that can completely change that around. But when you're an adult, it's like, no, you have to get up and you have to go to work and you have to do these other things. And you're like, and that question, not the question, but the statement that just said of there has to be more than this. I have uttered that phrase at least 6 times a week. Just like I get up and I'm going through the everyday of life. And it's like, there has to be more than this. You know, I mean, you know, I'm not, you know, a moisture farmer and you know, all of that. But I mean, I do live in Illinois. So, I mean, it's kind of the same. So like, but I do understand that idea, that kind of, so when I tell a story about the ordinary world, for me though, it's always just been kind of like what is happening, what normally happens, the everyday thing. That's kind of what the ordinary, you know, and so some people are sick of it. Sometimes your main character is sick of it. Sometimes though, your main character kind of likes it. They kind of like what's going on. You have like Simba, for instance, who his ordinary, you know, he couldn't wait to be king. He was like, my life is freaking awesome. And then, you know, well, his dad died. So poor Simba. But that's another hero's journey kind of story as well. I think Disney just kind of co-opted the Joseph Campbell way of life, and it just that's their standard for most of their films. But I think that the ordinary world is such an interesting thing, and it goes back to that conversation we had earlier about how, as a human beings, we all can relate to that, because I do think that's how we see the world. I wonder this though. The other thing that typically happens in the ordinary world is our protagonist is usually not always, but usually not as good at whatever it is they're going to become good at down the line. Sometimes they're already good at it, like in, for instance, the Indiana Jones stories, which Indiana Jones is kind of one of those things where technically the main character themselves doesn't necessarily change all that much by the end. But even still, Indiana Jones is just like good at everything. Indiana Jones.
I have an interesting theory about that. That's for a story for another time. That's all.
Don't worry, when we have an Indiana Jones episode, we'll talk about it. But when we definitely will have an
In fact,
Indiana
I think
Jones
I just wrote an article for Oba.
You did.
But the idea of Luke, for instance, Luke is not he's not the skilled Jedi that he ultimately is going to become in the very beginning. And so usually our protagonist is not. But how different do you feel like his arc would have been if Luke was already not necessarily a Jedi, but as close to that as he could be? How do you think the arc would have changed?
Well, he was a very skilled fighter pilot, which I think is one of the big skills that he taps into later. Not a fighter pilot, but he's a very skilled pilot, which allows him to be very natural once he becomes the fighter pilot that can destroy the Death Star. But I think that it would have been harder because Luke is I also shared when my little brothers were obsessed with Star Wars and they were watching this movie like 3 times a day, I got very familiar with it, and I very quickly got annoyed with Luke, and I was like,
Sound like my sister until about 10-ish years ago. I
was
say
like,
this lovingly.
sorry, us older siblings just ruin all the fun.
Well, she was very into the Jedi Apprentice books, so she's like the movies. Yeah, she loves them, but she loves the books. So
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. But yeah, Luke is like every character has flaws. I think the best protagonists have flaws, but the way Luke was, he's your typical young man who just has the utmost confidence in himself and is very annoying and whiny when everyone else doesn't follow what he thinks should happen. Again, like that's not a bad thing because that's very realistic. I can see myself in that. So it's a way that I can relate to him and I can kind of forgive him a little bit. But I think that flaw would have made it very difficult for him to learn humility because if your strength is already the skill that you need in order to defeat the monster, then you need to learn something else before you can defeat the monster, because otherwise you don't have a character arc. There has to be some kind of weakness that you have to turn into a strength by the end. So if the weakness wasn't lack of skill, the weakness would have been something inside him. And so he would have had to go through a much harder process of deconstruction so that he could acknowledge that he had an internal weakness. Because it's a lot easier to acknowledge when you're lacking a skill than you have an internal weakness. And especially with a character who has the kind of personality and immaturity that Luke does. So I can see it would have been you would have had to put him through the ringer on a lot of different emotional levels, I think, in order for him to realize how he needed to grow.
I think a lot of this gets paid off in the second one and the third one, but I think in general, if Luke was a great fighter and a great pilot, 2 things would have happened. One, his arc would have become much more darker, much more violent based, which would not have been a joy, but more to the point, he would have been way boring. Because the thing is, when he goes into the cantina, as a kid, I was like, oh no, that's a scary alien. Then I went through the hellscape of high school, and then I started seeing Luke. I'm like, boy, don't act like that. Don't let him touch you. I was like, you're in a thug land, man. Throw some balls. But that's the point, though. He doesn't know how to do anything. And if he did know how to fight and he did know how to fly, that's a boring character. But he's not a boring character because like he knows everything. It's not that. It's like you said, he has nothing to learn. There's nothing to grow. It reminds me, there's a bit in Avatar: The Last Airbender where book 3, Sokka wants to learn to be a better swordsman. And when he goes to this teacher, the teacher says, let me guess, you're the greatest swordsman in your village. And he says, I'm not. But at the beginning of the story, Sokka had said that. And he says, I'm the greatest swordsman. And he was lying, and he knew deep down he was lying, but that's a story for another day. But the point being is, speaking as someone who used to write these kinds of stories as a adolescent, all my characters were master fighters because that's what you want. You want the, sword thing. But real people aren't like that. And if Sokka in that story was an expert swordsman, it wouldn't have been as interesting. It's the same with Luke. It'd be much more of a darker story because it would have been about his pride. Interestingly enough, it would have been a lot like his father's story in the prequel trilogy, but that's a different conversation. So the fact that Luke can't do a lot of stuff is, I think, what makes him really work and gets developed very brilliantly.
Yeah, I do. You reminded me of Avatar, the movie. And that's another hero's journey where, like, you have the main character, Jake Sully, who is in that, and he is a very skilled fighter and, warrior. And, he's on this mission in another world. But he has to go through the breakdown of, like, oh, these aren't skills that are valuable here. These are, I have to unlearn all of these things as he, enters the world of Pandora and, like, their world, the Na'vi. That he really has to break those things down, everything that he thought he knew and all the things that he thought he, strengths and stuff were not actual strengths in their world. And so, yeah, I think you can do it as long as there is a recognition from the hero that what they know is actually not everything.
That's another really good point too. A fun way to add your own twist onto the hero's journey is not to just have a young character who needs to learn life skills, but have a character who has skills and is very comfortable in their life skills and throw them in a fish out of water situation.
So the way you said it makes sense, because I think I think if Luke had the skills and all of that from the beginning, I agree. I think what would have had to change, as far as from a writer's perspective, is you need to change Darth Vader in that perspective, because Darth Vader is far more skilled, far more imposing, but he's scary not just because of his his mask and his big imposing being, but also because he's far more superior when it comes to skill. He's an expert at what he does. And so the only opposition that makes sense is a character that has absolutely no idea what they're doing. So when you have a character that does know what they're doing, then suddenly it becomes less of a physical battle and more of an emotional battle. I don't think Darth Vader had to necessarily change in skill. I think the focus of the story might have had to be a little bit more different. We would have probably leaned more into the father-son element, and that becomes more of the challenge. When you think about like the movie, like the later James Bond movies, the Daniel
Craig.
Yeah, those versions, like Spectre and the one that came out most recently,
No Time to Die.
Yeah, like those. James Bond himself as a character is very skilled. He knows he's the top of what he does. So to ultimately make his stories interesting, you have to kind of make it more of an emotional thing, which is why I loved how from Casino Royale all the way to the most recent one, it was kind of a through line story. It wasn't like the older James Bonds where it was like an episodic movie every single time. It was like, no, we see this really badass dude who knows what he's doing, but then there's the heart. He has the heart, and then once that heart was affected, it kind of carried through everything else for the rest of the story. So I think if you have a character that you can, I think a lot of times we kind of kneecap our protagonist in skill or competence because we're like, oh well, they have to be kind of dumb or they have to be kind of inexperienced in order to tell a really good story. But no, you can actually have a really, really competent, really, really skilled character. You just need to kind of give them something to work with a little bit more. So like I said, if I have all the skill, hello kitty, if I have all the skills, if I have all the power, then hit me in my heart, because that's where my weakness is, and that's what has to kind of be used. All of that said, when we talk about the call to adventure, this movie has a really good one. It's sad, but I mean, as most call to adventures usually are, but not all of them, but most of them usually are pretty sad in some way, shape, or form. But what does a bad call to adventure look like in your opinion?
One that the hero can turn down. If the hero can walk away from it, then the audience can walk away from your story.
I started thinking about like all the movies that I've seen. A good guy was just like, nah, never mind.
Exactly. Like, if your hero can walk away from the journey, then that means that your audience can walk away from your book, because there's no reason for them to keep reading, because there's no investment.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, you have to build the stakes of their situation that honestly propels them on their journey. So yeah, like in Luke's case, his aunt and uncle dying, being murdered, kind of forces him to take that journey.
He's got nowhere else to live now. He doesn't have.
Yeah, they literally burned his house down and they razed his entire life. Like,
see, I'm trying to think of a really good example of this, because basically for me, I was gonna say everything you all said is correct, but something that kind of occurs to my brain is like something that feels, and again, we're going to like deep-rooted book trauma here. Something that's like, I'm going to be reading or watching a story that is about how awesome the character is. I can't stand that. But that being said, though, Dragon Ball, not Dragon Ball Z, the start of Dragon Ball, is basically just Goku wanting to go on an adventure with Bulma. There's not necessarily a stake that gets him to go. But I think also, like you said, Jared, that's something of his character. Because basically Goku, he can literally, Bulma shoots him in the face and the bullet bounces off him. So we know he's invincible. That's the first chapter of Dragon Ball. But it's about him wanting to learn about the world, because he's basically just been in this valley and he only lived with his grandpa, and then his grandpa's dead, so he's basically been alone with animals. So I think even then, in place of stake or something, he's got a curiosity. So I think in that sense, there has to be something that the character wants, no matter what, but it has to, I think, be interesting. Mm-hmm. So like here, George Lucas just said, kill them all and be done with it. So he literally says, there's nothing for me here. So that's kind of an interesting case there. But like, I think a bad call to action, honestly, is like you said, where it's just like, oh, okay.
Nah.
You've seen those movies where it's like, they're these big budget movies and they're like, we gotta go do this, or like, I don't know, Denny's is down the street. You can sit and have some coffee in a Grand Slam. That's kind of
You
an
need
issue.
that why. Like
Yeah.
that why that
Why
drives
am I
your
bothering? Like,
character.
so back to like Disney, you said Moana is a great example because you get this feeling that if someone doesn't do something, they're all gonna die. But it also is her desire to finally live out what she's been wanting. So I get the personal angle and I get the plot angle. But there are some other Disney movies, like some modern Disney movies, you just go, I don't care because there's no emotional investment. It's just watching. I pick on this movie a lot because I can't stand it. But the second Wreck-It Ralph 2 movie, it's the same reason. Let's just go on a thing, or we can go to Denny's or the equivalent of Denny's, because I don't really have an emotional investment. If I go on your journey, it's not really going to matter. And guess what? Wreck-It Ralph 2 doesn't matter. Hooray! But the first Wreck-It Ralph, he's after something. He wants something that he needs. And I go, oh, I feel like if I go on your journey, I'm going to learn something, or at least it's going to be entertaining. And I think that's kind of another element to that as well. But
Very
you two said it better than me.
I think the other one that I've seen in other people's work, people that I've read for and asked for my opinion about things, is the random chosen hero,
I hate that
where
trope.
there's
It's
kind
not
of
the good one.
no real reason for it. It's just kind of like you just happen to be here at this Subway's, and so now we have a thing for restaurants apparently, but like you just happen to
Your
be at this.
cheekbones are so perfect and your hair is so beautiful.
Exactly. And because of
The
that, you need
chosen
to go
one.
and save the universe. It's like, no, I don't think so. That doesn't work. I mean, there are those moments where I do think I find it, I won't say that I hate it because I think it can be done right. I do think randomly chosen heroes can be done right.
There are exceptions.
Especially if you're leaning into a more humorous route, because I do think that does happen. There are those things. For instance, damn, what's that movie called? It just came out this past Christmas. I forget what it's called, but it's the one with the dude who works for TSA.
I know what you're talking about. I watched it.
Yeah.
On Netflix.
Yes.
And yeah, he just randomly gets picked.
Exactly.
With a cell phone. Yeah.
It's like Die Hard I wouldn't say Die Hard in the airport, but
for Die Hard vibes.
yeah, I want to say Die Hard in the airport, but that's Die Hard too. So it's like
Die Hard-esque.
I am apparently a Die Hard nerd. Sorry, but it's kind of like the revamping of Die Hard in its own way. It's not as good as Die Hard, but it's still it's okay. The point is, though, the main character, like Jessica was saying, is a random hero. He's not. We meet him early on. We see his life. We see his struggles. He's got a very interesting, ordinary life. Not interesting, but it's interesting enough. Ordinary life, and then randomly he's selected because the dude that was supposed to get selected isn't, and now it's become his problem, and then he becomes like this hero. And for some reason it worked for me. I was like, okay, I can accept this. I'm not mad at it. I'm not mad at this thing, but I wouldn't make that like your go-to move. I think you can have a character that is I don't like necessarily the chosen one per se, but
I amend my statement. I was referring to the chosen one trope. That's what I don't like. I don't mind the random, like, you have no qualifications, you just randomly get chosen.
Right. And the whole, my book, My Sister's Keeper, I'm going to plug it at least once, but that comes out. That whole thing came from the idea of, like, when I came up with the idea, originally it was based off of what would happen if Xander from Buffy the Vampire Slayer stole Buffy's destiny and kind of just lived off his whole thing. And because I hated the chosen one idea so much that I was like, what if somebody's destiny, they live for it their entire life, this is what they've trained for, was taken by somebody who literally has never planned for it, never wanted to do it, and never had any design for it, and that just becomes their life. So I'm definitely anti-chosen one, but I do think a random chosen is a weird call to action. Same with passive protagonist calls, which I think kind of lines up with Jaylon's kind of, if they could be like, sure, whatever, I'll go. I'm not doing anything this week, so I'll go save the world. That's not a problem.
I will say, though, so we actually did jump ahead. Like, we're talking about the hero's journey. There was an earlier call to action in Star Wars before the Anathel die, when Luke gets the call. He finds R2-D2 and gets the message from Princess Leia. And that's the first call to action. So oftentimes our heroes actually do get an earlier call to action that is not as big, is not as threatening or, as loud or whatever it is. They get this, like, a tiny call to action. And then they actually refuse that and don't listen because, humans are stubborn.
So true.
And so it's actually the refusal is part of the hero's journey. And so Luke's like, well, no, I can't go save this princess, even though I want to, because I need to take care of my aunt and uncle, and I need to help at the farm, and I need to be here for them. And so that's his like refusal, right? And then obviously, then there's usually a like, and this is where in Joseph Campbell's, like, there's usually a supernatural aid or mentor, and that's Obi-Wan, gets introduced into the story that kind of pushes the hero to continue on their journey. And then there's like the final like acceptance, I guess, of the call, and that's when Luke loses his aunt and uncle. That like he's like, okay, now I can't ignore this, and now I'm saying yes to my adventure, to this journey. Let's see what happens.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Especially the realisticness of humans are stubborn, and it definitely does.
It takes a lot to change.
It takes a lot to get your attention, and it takes a lot to change. Change is not the normal way that we are comfortable with journeying. It's something that you really do have to be pushed along.
I agree with that. I think that's yeah, that whole refusal, the refusal to answer the call is yeah, it's definitely a common thing in stories. There are some stories where it doesn't happen that way, where it's just kind of like something happens and they're just like, I'm going. But I think that when it does work like that, it's usually because when they do discover it, it's so massive that the idea of saying no is kind of like, you know, you'd have to be like a dick to be like no. So, or either you had to be a dick to say no, or something really horrible has happened that you can't go back to. And in Luke's case, I think that's, you know, Luke could be like, you know, I would love to help you, but I can't help you. Sorry. And then he's like, and then his aunt and uncle are dead, and they burn his whole life to the ground. And he's like, well, you know, now I have nothing better else to do and no one else. So I'm going to go save you. So all of that being said, then, do you guys think, and this is kind of a rapid fire question, but do you guys think that Luke would have ever left if Uncle Owen and his aunt weren't killed?
No.
Yes.
Now we're cooking. Here we go.
So Charles.
And fight. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's
We will have our shoulder,
So I guess-
our angel and devil, whatever.
I guess I say no. I think ultimately, okay, so the no comes with a lot of asterisks. So I think yes, because ultimately the thing that defines Luke is that he thinks of others and he's good. He wants to help others. He's not like if he went to the Imperial Academy, he wouldn't have survived, because that's not him. So ultimately, he would have just had this in his head: R2, missing princess, kidnapped princess, rebellion, empire, blah, blah, blah. Also remembering the fact that the empire was going to come and kill his family anyway. So keep that in mind. But I say no in the sense of there's a flaw to him, which is the whole thing with all the Jedi. So this is a little bit of a bigger concept, is fear. There's the fear that he wants. I want something more. And Obi-Wan goes, let's go, kiddo. Let's go learn about God and lightsabers and stuff. And he goes, no, never mind. He starts making excuses. But it is that kind of sense of fear, and he has to be pushed to face that fear, which I think actually you can tie this into the ending, that it's not just the sense of, okay, if I want to be a Jedi, I have to use the Force, trust in the Force, turn off my computer. What is it? The tracking thing. I can't remember what the line is, which is weird because I know these lines so well. Anyway, but it's not just that. It's also that sense of the scope he has for the Death Star trench. It's like a training wheel. It's a sense of safety. It's okay, you have this, so you don't have to rely on the Force. You don't have to be afraid. So it is facing that fear. And I think there is that flaw in him that pushes him, that fear that something's going to happen to someone that he cares about, that he can't stop, that keeps him contained, which ultimately he faces. So I say no with an asterisk.
fair enough.
Yeah, and so I was going to say yes, but it would take him some time.
Yeah.
So he would not have gone when he did. It probably would have taken, whether it would have been, that voice in his head of saying, like, there is something else. He would have had to get over those comforts that he had in his ordinary life to really make that choice for himself, had he not had the, accelerated version of events happen with his aunt and uncle dying. Yeah, I think that's what defines, again, our hero. There's some, even with in the case of Random Hero, that we can't remember the name of that movie.
Yeah.
The airport movie, I think the reason why it works in that scenario is because of the character that they set up in that situation. It's like almost makes you go, oh, he really was the guy that was supposed to be there,
Yeah,
like,
true.
because like that's the person, like it's because of their character and their desire to do something good, to save the world, to save the princess or whatever it is. Like they have that innate drive, and so yeah, it might take them longer if they don't have this, kind of push towards that. But
Carry on. That is what it's called. Carry
there
on.
we go.
Carry on.
No, I love this question because I like to do this. I like to do the like what would happen in the movie if this didn't happen. Like I was just doing that side note on Revenge of the Sith, and I was like, what would have happened if Anakin was just like, all right, Obi-Wan, I screwed up. I'm not going to kill you. I'm not going to try to kill you. Let's go back. And like, what would that look like? What would it, I mean, I figure he would have still been arrested and there would have still been like a whole thing because he did still kill a bunch of kids. But like, even still, I like to do that. So I find it interesting of like, what if his aunt and uncle didn't die? What would happen? And what does that look like? That being said, let's move on to becoming the hero. The moment where the hero is in the prime of their becoming. When do you feel like, well, actually, here's a better question. Was Obi-Wan really the best mentor or guardian type character for Luke Skywalker?
That's a trick question. That gets into nitty gritty details. Okay, let me rephrase this. How geeky do you want my answer to be?
All of it.
As value based as you can provide, that is what I want your answer to be.
No. The answer is yes, because he shows Luke how to apply the skills that he has and how to learn new skills to survive and do what he does. Obi-Wan, secretly deep down, has this agenda where he's essentially using Luke kind of as an assassin, sure, to save the galaxy, but also to, get his own kind of revenge against Vader. At least that's been my interpretation for a long time. So, yes, but I think Obi-Wan is not pure, which could have perhaps led Luke down darker paths if they had stuck together around. There you go. That was a record time.
That was, but I loved it.
I do feel like it's interesting because you see Obi-Wan having such a pure heart, but his flaws leading to such dire consequences when he was a mentor in previous movies within the series, but later movies that came out. And so I feel like the fact that he was only Luke's mentor for a few days, if that.
In the grand scheme of things,
yeah. It's very interesting because, like Charles said, if he did have more time, would his flaws have affected Luke in a negative way as well?
That's a good question.
So in a sense, it is kind of like first of all, I think it's only realistic that no character should be 100% perfect and infallible. So even your guide characters who are supposed to have all the answers still have their flaws. So in that sense, if he's a good guide character, if he's a good character, period, he should not be perfect. And I think that it's just interesting when you put two flawed people together and have them learning, like in a mentor relationship where one is supposed to be learning from another. Given time, it can lead to very, very interesting situations, like with Darth Vader.
Have you guys seen Suits? The show Suits? Okay, well, all right then. Well, in the show Suits, there's this very interesting dynamic between the two main characters. There's Harvey, and then there's Mike. Mike, at the beginning of the show, is this very wide-eyed. He's not perfect, obviously. He's a liar. So he's basically a fraud. The entire premise of the show is the fact that he's a fraud. He's pretending to be a lawyer, and he's not. But his mentor knows that he's not a real lawyer. And so his whole thing is about winning at all costs, no matter what. Even if you have to cross the line, even if you win. And so this young, wide-eyed guy who just happens to be really good at remembering things and is just crazy smart goes down this path with this mentor who's not always morally on the right side of things. And I love that. I love when a mentor is not always good. For instance, Sebastian and I wrote about in the article, The Black Butler. The characters where you have a gray mentor is always awesome. I always thought that Obi-Wan would have been much more interesting to me if he was more like, what's his name? Haymitch. I think his name is Haymitch from...
Yeah.
I always thought he would have been far more interesting if he was like that, just because based off of everything, especially when you see the prequels, and you see everything that he went through. And then even if you watch the Obi-Wan little mini series that happens and you get that kind of bridge between the movies and you get that kind of feel. It's like, I feel like Obi-Wan was nowhere near in A New Hope was nowhere near as messed up as he should have been. He had
always thought he was putting on an act.
that could be
that
it.
was always kind of the vibe I got, especially
That could definitely be it. That definitely could have been it, because I always felt like Obi-Wan should be far more screwed up than he is.
He turns from Ewan McGregor to Alec Guinness, so that's screwed up. He turns white, if that means anything.
But he's
I
just
say
like
partially
he's
as
just,
a joke, but partially as a.
But I mean, he's like, use the Force, and you have to be the way of the Jedi. And I'm thinking this dude should just be out here like, killing stormtroopers and just like murdering people like a crazy samurai. That's what I was thinking. But I really do. I would say that as far as like the entire original trilogy goes, the best mentor for Luke would have either been Han, because I feel like Han was more realistic to the way that the world was, or the one that ultimately ends up becoming his mentor, which is Yoda. Yoda is definitely the better mentor for Luke than Obi-Wan. But when you grow up watching Star Wars, you always think Obi-Wan is. That's it, a full stop. But yeah, I'm glad you guys have thoughts on that. What do you guys think? Do you feel that the Death Star rescue was more than just an action sequence? And if so, why do you feel that way?
I feel it is more than action sequence because the teacher leaves the classroom. It's Luke's idea to do more. So this is, again, the goodness, right? He goes, oh, but they'll kill her if we don't do something. So there's that. And then there's Han, he acts about the money, but then he does some crazy stuff. So there's even development of his arc that gets started there. But basically, they have to do stuff without Obi-Wan over their shoulder, and specifically Luke over his shoulder. So I think that's kind of the thing. And also, it's the Death Star sequence, and it's awesome.
And also, just the characters of Leia and Han will never not be iconic in the way that they interact.
Yeah, Jared, you said that you liked Luke more as an older person. The older I've gone, I'm like, Leia, she's the best one. Not that I ever I always loved Leia, but the older I get, I'm like.
When I was growing up, Han Solo was my favorite, and then it became Luke. And yeah, I can support the Leia.
Yeah, sorry, Jaylon, I just wanted to throw that in there.
No, that is definitely facts. I don't think I have anything else to add to that, because I really love the way you just summed it up with the teacher leaves the classroom. Like, you have your tests, your trials, your tribulations. You have the character trying to grow. And it is just, there's something so profound about the best learning experiences happen when you're forced to figure out what to do in a real life situation. And that's where the true character comes through. I mean, I feel like that sequence is where you really get to know the characters, because you see them react under pressure. So you get to know who they are in such a primal reaction, just like trying to survive. So I think that just makes it so much more interesting and also so much more real.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what, like, thinking about, again, the hero's journey. And you mentioned, like, so you're going through these tests and trials, and you're like, Luke is learning, and he's learning about the Force, but like all of that is in a sense sometimes artificial, because you're not putting it into action yet. And you're also, like you said, you have your teacher there, your mentor there, and so like the hero is learning through this process and learning more about themselves, and having that internal journey. But it really isn't until that big battle when the hero is actually tested, of like taking everything they've learned up until that point, everything that they have learned on this journey, and can they do it alone? Because a lot of times, like you said, the hero, the mentor is gone. The hero has to figure it out for themselves. And that's like that pivotal moment of like, are they going to succeed? Are they going to come back with the prize, and in this case, the princess.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, I think you guys are absolutely right. I have nothing to add to that particular statement. I think
we
that you
did
guys
it.
are all...
We got the right answer.
Yes, the teacher is in the classroom, and I have no, but
A's.
Yes, for sure. When do you guys feel like Luke actually starts to change?
I kind of, yeah. See, this is another reason why I didn't like Luke, because I feel like in this movie, he doesn't really change all that much internally. I mean, like, he changes in his skill set and in his priorities, but he doesn't really change internally until we get to, I mean, you guys have touched on it, the 5th movie, the 6th movie. That's where they actually start digging into that internal hero's journey and really digging into that emotional arc of making him into a better person. So my answer would be he doesn't really in this movie.
Yeah, I think the only thing that he does is that, again, he has to actually trust in the Force and dedicate himself to that. But in this movie, I mean, I've actually really said between of the 6, if you really wanted to get into it, I can see. Well, I don't care about the Star Wars fan base. It's the worst fan base of all time. Never mind. Moving on. I don't care. I can say whatever I want. They never let me talk, so I'm going to say my piece. The original Star Wars is the least depthful of the 6. Like, honestly, if it wasn't for the Force aspect, this would almost be like Space Indiana Jones, instead of just being a fun serial. But there is the Force, so there's the spirituality aspect, and there's clearly more going on politically with it too. But to that end, yeah, I think it's him choosing the Force. That's when he changes. Otherwise, in the grand tapestry, this isn't the one where he does the change. So I agree.
So I'm gonna have to say I do think he does change a bit, only and it is surrounding the trust in the Force, because that really does. It sounds easy because, when we're thinking of a fictional world like Star Wars, we're like, of course the Force exists, right?
Yeah.
Again, like applying it to our own lives, like that internal journey that someone has to go on of just believing in something that they can't see, something that's bigger than them, is a huge step, to be honest. Like, to get over your fear, like when he's trying to, like the very first scene, when he's learning like lightsaber and he's trying to hit the target and he's blindfolded, and like that takes that level of trust in something else that you can't quite grab, you can't quite grasp. And a lot of people honestly get stopped right there. They don't trust that, like, I mean, for example, like I quit my job 2 months ago, and I just decided I was going to trust myself and the universe that I would figure things out and I would have a job at some point. Not a job, but like that I would be able to support myself. And like that stops a lot of people, is just simply trusting and getting past that fear that you can do something. So like a lot of people just don't take that step. And so I think like Luke's journey as he's learning through those trials and training with Obi-Wan, like he finally does have to, when he's flying, what do they call it? The fighter jet?
The Y-Wings?
The X-Wing, yeah.
No, there are Y-Wings in the finale with X-Wing.
He has to actually trust the Force to guide him. And I think that's where he does change and grow in this first movie that he's in, is that is a step on its own. And it's really hard for a lot of people to trust in something bigger than themselves.
That's a good point. I'm glad that you said that.
I agree with that. I would say that, yeah, and I think that a great signpost in your story for how to see where a character is changing is where those moments are challenged, where that change is challenged. Han is a great example of the challenge to Luke's change, in the sense of Han is the one that's telling him, you don't believe in all that, wizard woo-woo crap. And which only leads into Luke, who's like, I'm trying to do this thing, but, do I really believe it? I don't know if I really believe that. And so Han is playing that devil's advocate to Obi-Wan, who's like, no, you gotta believe. You gotta believe in yourself. You gotta believe in connecting the little, the threads inside of yourself that allow you to do the things you need to do. And while Han is not a bad guy, he's not an antagonist in any way. He's not necessarily the bad guy, but he still challenges our hero and what he believes. And his ability to defy the being that is challenging his belief is the proof of change. And I think that goes for every single story where you're trying to find, where does my hero change? Where does the hero change? Where have they been challenged? If your hero hasn't been challenged, and that's again, goes back to real life. In real life, you will never change if you're not challenged. If you're not challenged to change, you will never do it. And so in those little contentious moments in your story, whether it's something really, really massive, like a philosophical difference that you two have, or it's something as simple as, two people trying to decide whether they want vanilla or chocolate ice cream, these challenges are ultimately what determine how your characters grow. And I think as human beings, as here at Oba, our whole thing is to help you become not just a better writer, but a better human being, showing up at the page as a better human being. Understand that it's important for you to lean into the challenges, lean into the things that are scary and that defy whatever it is you believe in the moment. And I think that's what made Luke a better character in the end, is because he leaned into all the scary stuff that defied everything that he believed in when he was on Tatooine.
I think we need to give Jessica a round of applause for demonstrating this in real life too, because
yes, she did.
That is an impressive.
She is on a real life hero's journey. And
I am.
Yes.
So yeah, awesome. That being said, here's a question for you guys. Why does the trench run work so well as a climax? Why is that the best choice?
It's literally a tight spot. You talk all the time about like raising the stakes, putting your character in a tight spot. And the trench run was literally a tight spot. It seemed impossible. It was like something that was said even in the council. They were like, that's impossible. And so giving an impossible challenge that costs something too, because there were 5-6 people who tried and lost their lives. So, immediately that's raising the stakes really high. Because, odds are 6-0 that Luke is going to die attempting it. So, honestly, I can remember how the very first time I ever watched this movie, I was young-ish, but I can remember, like, literally not being able to breathe through that sequence just because it was so tense. I should have, like, at this point, I loved stories, but I still got caught up in them and wasn't, like, in the mindset of, oh, it's all gonna work out in the end.
It's the best stories.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's what makes it the best. Like when you're still worried about the characters, even though you know.
Yeah.
Even better are the ones where like you've seen it a million times and you still
and
you still feel that way. It's like you still get that feeling of like, wait a minute.
Add to that too that not only is it the trench, but I also think it's brilliant that all they can do is face it. Here it is. You have to go straight in a line. Hope the towers don't hit you. Hope the TIE fighters don't hit you. But you have to face it on your own, period. And you have to make a decision now. So with the whole like beep, 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 beep thing coming closer, yes, it's great suspense in terms of cinema, but I think in terms of thematic writing, it's saying you have to make a decision now. So I think that's why, like you said, it's geography.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it just shows us what our character is made of. Like that's why it's kind of the pinnacle moment of the hero's journey is they've gone through the trials, they've gone through the Dark Knight, they've gotten their reward, and now this is the final battle, the final test of what are they made of. Like this is their defining moment that shapes them in this story, until the next movie and next hero's journey.
Because there's always more. Spoiler alert. There's always something more that you have to learn.
There is. Yeah, the hero's journey doesn't end when it ends. It just starts over.
True. And that's, again, brings us back. It's the funny thing because it really does keep bringing us back to real life. That's the funny thing about real life is that you go on a journey in life. You decide you're going to do a thing. You go and do that thing. You come against all these different obstacles. You lose some, you win some, whatever. And sometimes you win. Sometimes you have a happy ending and you achieve the thing, even though it was a really hard battle. And sometimes you don't. Sometimes you lose and it's sad or whatever. But when that's over, the thing about life is until you die, there are no end credits. It's just the next adventure. And so every single time something ends, I've gone, in the spirit of transparency, I've gone through currently going through a really tough time right now with a lot of really sad stuff. And it's made me realize that this is my hero's journey. I'm at the tragic call to action where it's like, all this my life has been continuously telling me to go somewhere else. And I've just been like, I can't do it. I got to stay where I'm at. And now life has made it where it is impossible for me not to go somewhere else. And that's scary within itself because now it's like, well, what's this adventure hold? And what are the obstacles I'm going to have? But I think that that's kind of what we all kind of do. I think Star Wars is a great example of it. I do think that for us creatives out there who are constantly throwing projects at the wall and hoping something sticks, the climax to Star Wars is a perfect example of that. Because with, like Jaylon said, you have all these other fighters that had tried it and failed, and then you just had Luke, and it's kind of the same thing. When you go after, I'm going to put a book out, I'm going to make a movie, I'm going to do these other things, and you're like, so many other people have made books, have made movies, have done this thing, and many of them have just crashed into the wall, and it's just never worked, and you just and it feels like the beep, 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 beep. World. You hope and you trust in the force of your own creativity. In essence, you're going to be the one that will hold everything up. I think it's a great example for creatives in general. But even if you're not a creative, anybody who's ever wanted anything, anybody who's ever wanted to truly achieve something that other people also want to achieve, I think this is a great example of it. And I think also the whole hero's journey through the lens of real life is just a great way to get through life.
Oh yeah,
it's a much better way to get through life because when you can see life that way, you do know that the hero's journey is based off of myth and legend and things of that nature, but myth and legend are based off of real life. So it all comes from, you just know that because we live in this big circle, you know what I mean? Everything is cyclical. you have to know that no matter how hard the times you're having are, eventually you do end up something good is going to happen. That's just kind of the way life works. And it's kind of fun. One of the reasons why I do love stories so much is that realization. What makes a satisfying hero transformation to you?
That's hard because I feel like I'm really weird and dark and twisted in this way too.
He's got to turn into a villain and kill a bunch of younglings. That's the only way.
Okay, well, no. I'm thinking more Obi-Wan. Like,
Oh, I'm sorry.
he tried to do a good
Let my
thing.
darkness show there.
He
Sorry.
tried to do a good thing. I like the twist. Okay. I like the twisted characters who have to learn that life doesn't always work out the way they want it to. And sometimes they have to accept something. They have to accept a happy ending that's not the happy ending they wanted. For example, Obi-Wan was trying to redeem how he had failed to train Anakin with training Luke. But instead, he ended up sacrificing his life, letting Darth Vader kill him. So that's not an example of a hero having a transformation, but that's an example of like a happy ending that is not the happy ending you were expecting. I feel like in life, again, going back to real life, because this is such a good example of why story is the DNA of who we are as humans, and it just connects everyone because it's part of us. It's been part of us since the very beginning. And a lot of times in real life, we have our vision of what a happy ending is, what success is, but we have to learn that sometimes the success isn't saving the princess or getting a bunch of money as a reward or having the hot princess put a medal on us in front of an assembly. Sometimes the happy ending is having to learn a really hard lesson. Sometimes it's having to accept a really ugly truth about the way the world works. So in some ways, like, I do still love your satisfying happy ending. Mm-hmm. There's a place for that in any, like, no matter how dark you are, there's a place for that.
For sure.
But I think in the spirit of the hero's journey being so much like real life, I find it very satisfying when they have to find the happy ending in the not happy ending.
Yeah. To that end, I would say I think a satisfying hero's journey ending is something irrevocable. So if it's in a more classical sense, think Kiki's Delivery Service, Spider-Man 2, where the hero puts everything on the line, and not necessarily because they succeed, but they throw themselves out there. No more playing, no more doubts. They're just going to do it, come what may. They're going to throw everything out there. In a more poetic sense, the more serious or sadder or darker, I think it's not Spider-Man 3, actually, the very ending of Spider-Man 3, where there is knowledge that Peter knows now and has that cannot be taken away from him. Is there, or even in another sense, this is kind of a little bit different because these movies, I finally saw the first movie, Godfather, after knowing the book from high school, and then saw part 2 shortly after recently, so they're still in my head. I always loved it that the Don dies of a heart attack. That's it. It's not an assassin. It's not this. He's just playing with his grandkid in the garden and keels over. I always thought from the book that was such a brilliant way to do it because it's kind of a testament of all the stuff that he had done that were bad for his family, the stuff that he suffered, all his pain and joy culminates ultimately into this moment. And to quote, this is weird, I haven't thought this quoting in years. There's a young New Zealand filmmaker who died when he was a teenager named Cameron Duncan, who you would know if you know from the Lord of the Rings making ofs, where his last short film before he died was he had this phrase, when your time is up, and you just hope to God you've done something worthwhile with your life. That kind of reminds me of Godfather in that sense. Or you can have, again, something more touching, slower, quieter. Rocky 6, or Rocky Balboa, actually Rocky 6, the end of the Rocky Balboa era of the Rocky movies is kind of like that too. It's just quiet, fade away, but irrevocable knowledge is known. So either throw yourself out there and take something that cannot be changed. I think that's what's satisfying. Good or bad or a mix or whatever.
I like that word.
Yeah, I like both of those things. And I'm thinking too of just a satisfying hero transformation for me would be the hero finding out more of themselves, like becoming a more truer or authentic version of themselves by the end, like that maybe they wouldn't have discovered in that journey. So again, back to real life, I feel like so many people, I'm I'm 38 years old and I'm still figuring things out about myself and I'm still learning about myself and and like that's what life is about, right? It's like you're figuring out who you are in this world and in our short lives and you're becoming more yourself. And so like, you know, Luke, had he not gone on that journey, and it doesn't even matter necessarily, like you were saying, Jaylon, like the actual outcome, whether it's what they expected, whether they defeated the bad guy, whether they destroyed the empire, you know, whatever. The physical thing that they do doesn't matter as much about who they are at the end. And I think that's you know, they learned something about themselves. They learned a piece of themselves that they did not have before the journey happened.
Very good way of putting it.
I think for me, what I find satisfying is I don't know if it's the only thing that I find as a satisfying ending or a satisfying transformation, but the number one that I love is I love when a character holds something so dear to them, whether it be an ideology, whether it be a person, whether it be a trinket or a weapon, whatever. A thing that they just hold so dear and they're forced to sacrifice that thing and then they survive that sacrifice. That to me is my favorite thing because it's the thing that I have been challenged to do in my life the most. I have always been a person who has hated change. Terribly hated change. When I latch onto a person, when I latch onto a thing, when I latch onto an idea, I want it to be with me forever. And the idea of it not being there is anxiety inducing for me. And so the idea of losing that thing, whether it be that thing leaves, that thing dies, that thing, a new idea comes in its place, a new event happens, whatever it is always a sacrifice. And for me, the fear from the beginning is always, if that thing was to leave, if that person was to leave, if that whatever, I would die. I could not survive. I wouldn't be able to do it. But the moment where in my life, as many times as it's happened, I still live this way. I still have that feeling, but as many times as it's happened, that's always been my thought. I can't lose this thing because I'll die. And then I end up sacrificing that. Things end up getting sacrificed, and then I live. And then when not only do I live, I'm stronger for it, and then I move on to the next thing. And I love watching characters do that. I just think that and I think that happens in most stories. I think most stories, especially stories with positive change arcs, we always have the character has the lie that they believe. And they usually hold on to that so dearly for the entire story. And then something forces them to let it go. And then they live and they go on to do, sequels and franchises. But so I think that's what makes a really satisfying transformation for a character. I think that's also a really satisfying transformation for human beings in general. Is when we can learn to do that, learn to let go. That's the best thing that every character and human being can do.
You've reminded me of a quote that I was thinking of recently because I was thinking about how much I hate change in my life. I get in my comfort zone. I don't want to think outside it. I don't want to live outside it. And so that's why, for the ordinary world, I can relate to just wanting to stay in the comfort zone and not wanting to leave. I would need several nudges and something actually physically burning my reality to the ground in order to get me to leave. And life has done that for me. And yeah, it is beyond anxiety inducing. But the quote that I was thinking of recently when I was thinking about the way that I resist change as a human was everything I've ever let go of has claw marks on it. And I think that it's such a beautiful way of acknowledging that there is something so beautiful about trying so hard to hold on to something, and the evidence of trying to hold on to it is in the pain of letting it go.
I like that quote. It's a good quote. Okay. We had a little heart to heart there, huh? That was
We really hit the real
went deep
home.
Thanks, George Lucas.
I've said it for years. Star Wars is way more depthful than anyone gave it credit for back in the 70s today. I've said this for years.
Everyone listen to Charles.
So here's the last question before we jump into our 3 key questions every writer should ask themselves to test their hero's journey. But would Star Wars have worked and still been as iconic as it is if it did not follow the hero's journey?
Oh, now there's a good question. I don't think so.
I'm going to say no.
Yeah.
I don't think so. If you look culturally, so you've heard the whole story about Star Wars came out the right time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there's all that stuff, but and it's weird because it's funny because honestly, for me, I feel 2 movies in the past 2 years have had the same thing, which are Barbie last year and Wicked last year. that it wasn't just those are really successful films, people liked them, blah, blah, blah. People clicked something in their heads at the time. And I think it's the same thing with Star Wars, that it wasn't just good versus evil. That was always the old, if you watch these old 70s things, because I am that kind of geek, I find all these archival footages of news stuff with this. They always said that good versus evil, but it wasn't about good versus evil. I think it was talking about something of the spirit. And I think the way Lucas got there was using that formula. Kind of like what I said, use the formula as the base and then dug deeper into something more primal. And I think if he didn't have the hero's journey, because remember too, the one thing he tried to do before Star Wars, or the thing that Star Wars became, he tried to do Flash Gordon. And I think if he had done Star Wars like Flash Gordon, it would have been serial fun. Or if he did just a straight samurai kind of picture in space, it would have been more philosophical. Or if it was, cowboys and this and that. I think because it's the hero's journey, first of all those elements came together into what he wanted, but I think it allows the story to have become something bigger. So it's not just standard American boy goes and blows up the government's big super weapon. By the way, the government has a big super weapon. It's less about that, and it's more about what we've been talking about. Same with Han, same with Leia, and all these other characters. And I think, even Vader in that sense, Vader doesn't become this mustache twirling villain. There's something bigger about him, something even more, dare I even say, charming in an interesting villainous way, because there's something more nastier about him, because it's more serious, because of the hero's journey, which is why I said if it wasn't for that hero's journey element, those spiritual elements, this would kind of be Indiana Jones in space, but it's not for that reason. So I agree. Yeah, I think if you don't have the hero's journey, I think Lucas couldn't have found what he wanted, especially in the original drafts. Good Lord. They're not bad, but they're convoluted and weird and just, they're fine. They're fine. Versus this, which is like the best thing since sliced bread. And I think the hero's journey allowed that to be simplified and focused on the heart rather than the political trappings of blah, 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 blah. Basically, he was trying to be like Frank Herbert in a sense. Frank Herbert and Jack Kirby, but he couldn't do it. Probably of his own words, honestly. That's not making that up.
Note to writers the power of several drafts and letting an idea cook and working on it for a long time.
Bro, I can't tell you. First of all, I hate that. I hate it so much. But also, it's true.
The idea that I'm still working on it, it'll be 10 years this April. It took me like almost 4 years to start putting stuff really to paper. And even then, I had to fix a lot of that later. So, yeah.
Yeah, my Sister's Keeper started in 2013, and it's just now going to beta readers. So it takes time. I hate it, but it takes time. It takes time to find the good stuff. But when you do find the good stuff, oh boy,
yeah,
is it good? Is it good?
That also just speaks to creative energy as its own thing, that it's not necessarily it's the force, right? Yeah. So there's this creative energy flowing through all of us.
Yes.
They come through in stories, and you don't always know where they're going, and you don't know how they're going to manifest in the real world and how they're going to come out of us. And so I wrote my book probably in the span of 6 months, but that was in 2020. Mm-hmm. And then it just let it sit on my computer for 5 years. But I knew it wasn't, I don't know, for many reasons, but it wasn't time for it to be birthed into the world. And now it's time. I'm working on edits and things like that now to really get it ready. But again, I think it comes back to, we don't always know how that creative energy is going to come out. And so letting that process, come out in whatever way it is. And that's what's beautiful when it is, because we're all unique and we all have different experiences and feelings and emotions and thoughts. And so tell your story, because you're going to be the only person that can tell it in that unique way.
Exactly. Going back to your question on if Star Wars could have been as iconic if it didn't use the hero's journey, the best stories are old. We talked about this when we talked about our Hadestown episode, where it's a sad story, it's an old story, but we're going to tell it anyway, because the best stories have had time to sit and to grow and for the good stuff to come out. The longer an idea cooks, the more well developed it's going to be. But also for a story, the longer it lives, the more it means. And it can mean something different to every generation based on their perspective that they're viewing it through. So with the hero's journey being such an old part of our DNA, I think that it did make such a, I mean, Star Wars was the first movie of its kind in a sense, with it being like such a unique space opera almost. But it worked because it struck a very old pattern that is deep inside of us.
That
I agree.
yeah, that would have been my answer too, because I think that's what I think that's why Star Wars works, is because and if you think about it, like mostly all iconic films, novels, anything that's iconic, they're usually iconic because of the fact that they relate, so we understand them on a DNA like level. That's not to say that like experimental stories that kind of venture off can't be iconic and can't be great, because there are plenty. But all the ones that are iconic typically do, not all the ones that are iconic, but all the ones that do resonate with us on that DNA level tend to be iconic films, which is why I think Disney does so well as far as stories go, because they know from the beginning how to relate to the way we relate to life. And that's ultimately, I mean, from the beginning of civilization, from the moment that human beings started telling stories to one another, it has always been our ability to connect with each other is through storytelling, from cave paintings all the way down to, these things. It's we've kind of always learned, how do we tell each other things? How do we help each other navigate the world? How do I get you from all the way over there to understand what's happening with me all the way over here? And story has always been the bridge that makes you do that. And I think Star Wars is another example of, even though it's set in a galaxy far, far away from here, it's still somehow relatable to the world that we currently live in. So yeah, I think that the hero's journey is a perfect. I agree. I don't think it would have been as iconic. I still think it could have been good, but I don't think it would have been iconic and have lasted the test of time as it has done without it. So yeah, that's some awesome stuff. We had some solid stuff. So time for a little shameless plug-in. If you are struggling to make your protagonist journey compelling, we do free consults where we break down your story arc and we help you figure out what's missing. No pressure at all, but you can find your free link to our calendar in our show notes. Feel free to jump on in there and do that so we can help you get that thing rolling. That being said, here's our takeaway moment for the audience. The 3 key questions that you should ask to test your hero's journey. The first question that you should ask is the call to adventure personal enough? If the protagonist, as Jaylon said, can ignore it, will things get worse or not? If the protagonist ignores it, will things get worse or not? If they won't, take it back to the drawing board, because we need a little bit more. We need some higher stakes coming in there. Is the adventure forcing them to confront something internal? Is there a deep-held belief that they just need to deal with, and this adventure is what's going to ultimately help them deal with it? If your answer to those 2 questions are, I forgot what the way that I worded those questions, so ultimately, just rewind. You know what I said. All that being said,
I said what I meant.
Yeah, you know what I meant. Does the middle of the journey actually change the hero? Do we feel that the hero has gone from either, and it doesn't have to be for the better. It can be worse. That's okay. Your hero can become a big son of a bitch. That's totally fine. We're all okay with that. But do they change in some way? And also, are they forced to let go of old beliefs? We just talked about that. Sacrificing that thing that they hold dear. Are we forcing them to do that? Or if it's a negative change arc, are they clinging to it even more? And if so, what are the consequences of them doing that? Perfect example, Scarface. Great example of a story of the character holding on to a belief that is terrible for him, and it ultimately leads to his demise. Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Scarface. You should have. I don't know what's wrong with you, but it's fine. Unless you're Jaylon.
Oh,
I haven't seen Scarface.
Okay, I'm
I
not
haven't seen
alone this time.
Scarface.
Charles.
I have a very specific reason why I don't have an interest in it, and that it's not
I've
suitable.
seen Scarface.
Yeah.
Listen, guys.
This is on you.
You guys are not helping my point at all.
Everything else you said was on point. It's okay.
But anyway, Scarface is a great movie, and I don't care what anyone has to say about it.
I'm gonna go watch it after this.
Yeah, our homework.
The final question is, does the hero choose who they become at the end? Is the final decision theirs alone? And can they prove that they have changed? Now, I would say that even if they haven't chosen to change, because sometimes a hero will change and they didn't make the decision to change. Life kind of changed them. The whole, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock landed on us type of thing tends to happen, and that's okay too. The ultimate goal at the end is that our hero has found a way to change in some way, and they can prove it. We can point to the change that they've made. If you can nail those 3 questions and you can answer those 3 questions, your hero's journey is in good shape. There's a lot more to the hero's journey, and if you need a little more help, get your free consult and we can do it. So our last, there's 2 more segments that we're going to do, and then we're going to hop up out of here. But is the lightning round, which is my favorite. Well, it's my second favorite. My first one was murdered.
It's dead.
Recently. It was recently murdered by the discontent of my team. But it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. I'm not upset about it or anything. So, here we go. Rapid fire. We listen. We do not judge. I'm going to ask these questions. You let me know first thing that comes to your mind. I will allow explanations if you feel the need to explain. But here we go. I know that kind of flies in the face of lightning, but whatever. Thunder round then, whatever. Best mentor character in any story.
Best mentor character?
Best mentor character.
Say.
Wait, what was it?
I was going to say also.
Hamish.
Uncle Iroh from Avatar. No question.
Damn, that was a good one. Well, shit. Damn, everybody got all the good ones.
V for Vendetta is pretty good too.
Yes.
If I have to switch mine, that's what I'm switching to.
I guess. Yeah.
I feel like you got to say Obi-Wan at this point.
No, I refuse.
Rapid fire.
Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty.
Okay.
No, fight me. I'm willing to fight for this.
Okay,
We listen, but we don't judge. What's a hero journey movie that totally flopped, in your opinion?
Charles is gonna hate me.
Oh, God. Lightsaber is ready.
Okay, I'm not going
I feel like we're going to
it.
say the same thing, but...
I'm not going to say it because I did not watch the 8th one because I
already
lost
know what it is
interest
now.
by the 5th.
We were definitely going to say the same thing. Harry Potter for sure.
You are wrong. You are objectively wrong.
We'll give it another shot at some point because I really did want to like it. I just had a hard time liking it.
Nope,
So
I won't.
I know what mine is.
Okay.
And there's probably going to be a lot of people that also hate me. So
We're not
that's my-
judging.
Is Dune.
Wait, the newer Dune?
So I have not read the books, and so
Yeah,
I think
the
that's
books, Jerry.
probably part of why I didn't resonate with, because I think people love the movie because they read the books, and I just watched the first movie, and I just couldn't get into it. It seemed like the hero's journey just like so boring though.
Yeah.
I liked the Dune movie though, so
Well, I know a lot of people do.
I didn't read the books, but I did like the Dune movie.
Okay.
I think this is another point that, like, what calls your hero into their journey has to be personal, not only to the character, but to the person that's watching it.
That's true.
As a longtime fan of the series, I will say, like, don't listen to the Dude Bros. Dune is an acquired taste.
Mhm.
Like, they make it go, yeah, you gotta know it. I'm like, no, it's an acquired. Even I go sometimes, God, this is boring. Not boring, convoluted, but, and I've been a fan longer than most of them. So, honestly, first of all, no, I'm not going to talk about Harry Potter because we're going to save a whole lecture about that for.
I will sit myself down and let myself be lectured by you because I feel like I deserve it.
I love Harry Potter.
Oh, God.
You don't have to agree with me. I just need to explain myself.
Listen,
The
there is a
Star Wars
watch
fandom
list. You are
experience.
more than welcome. You are free to add Harry Potter to the watch list, and we will be forced to watch it.
I will say, a journey that doesn't feel like it works for me, honestly, in terms of hero's journey, it's any of these god awful, vaguely toxic, modern, all ages animated films with some spunky protagonist. Disney's Wish I've complained about, or they're bad. They're really bad. And the Super Mario Brothers movie is a bad movie, and I'm not having it. My friend was like, "Well, I like that movie better than the Sonic movies." I'm like, it's a good thing I love you, man. It's a good thing I love you. I don't get it. I don't. Every time everybody goes, no, the Mario movie's so good. I'm like, no, it's not. What are you talking? Anyway, but no, anything that's like a bad all ages animated movie since 2006. Honestly, any of those. I don't know which one. Just pick one.
Okay. Wizard of Oz. Wizard of
okay.
Oz. Nope.
Interesting, if wrong choice, but an interesting choice.
Nope. It's not. It's not good. I'm sorry. It's not actually.
Okay.
Well, we'll talk. Put it on the list. We'll talk about it. We'll have a whole episode about it, and I'll tell you why it's not good.
It is good.
Charles, we're gonna have to fight.
He does have the lightsaber, so I wouldn't,
I know
I wouldn't
mine's
poke
just
this-
Mine's is under a pile of books, so apparently you've won. Who is the better hero, Luke or Frodo?
Those are two different, very, very different conversations. See, Frodo is the protagonist, but he's not a hero in that great mythical sense. He's like some sort of postmodern Christian protagonist. Like Christian from Pilgrim's Progress, but on crack cocaine. Luke. I'm gonna play it safe and just say Luke.
I'm going to say Frodo because when he has to go on his inner journey, he grieves a lot more realistically than Luke does.
Fair enough.
This was like a devil angel thing, Jared. Darn you.
Sorry. I gotta get it in there somehow, bro. Sorry.
Team Luke. So
I will also say Luke. I will say Luke. Last question. I know this is not relevant to the New Hope and majority of the original trilogy as far as like what's mentioned, but is a Star Wars universe question. Are you a Sith or a Jedi?
Jedi, no question. Move on.
Jedi.
I am a Sith, period.
Are you also Slytherin?
I am also that too. That's so
No, but the Slytherins can be good people though. This is something that I feel the books and films did not quite get right. But the Sith are evil. They are about themselves and selfishness. I literally just wrote an article pretty much ranting about the people that are about run the world, and they are the Sith. And most of the Star Wars fan base are the Sith too. Haha, I don't care. They already hate me when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, when I was a young adult, and now I'm almost 30. Screw them. So
very, very specific reason why I will never be a Jedi, and it is tied to my own relationship with religion.
Fantastic, but don't be the Sith.
No, if I had to choose between the two, it was a one or the other type of decision, so I had to choose anything that is not Jedi is what I'm choosing. But okay, so great. We've done our lightning round, guys. Just please tell us where everybody can find you. Tell us when your book is coming out, if you know, and where they'll be able to get it when it comes out.
So right now the best place to follow me is on Substack. So that's where I am at most often these days in the internet world. My Substack is called Wildest Dreams. It's literally my spiritual and creative journey in becoming a published author in 180 days. So I like deadlines. So you can follow my journey. It is jessannecreates.substack.com. And then same with, you can follow me on Instagram or Facebook, either at Jessica Ann or Jess Ann Creates on those platforms as well. Yeah, I'm super excited. I got back my developmental edits from my editor last week, and so I really did a deep dive into just fixing luckily didn't have too many like big plot holes or just things that need to be addressed, a larger story arc piece of things. And so I got those done, and now we're working on line edits is the next step in my process. But yeah, I'm super excited
the book is called
Woven in Time, is the series. It is book 1 is The Silver Serpent.
And do you have a log line for book 1? Just a plug-in log line to whet the appetite?
Put you on the spot there. Yeah.
I say this actually to help, honestly. Not
I know you are. I love it.
I could read the whole back cover blurb if you want, but no, I have the one line. So 3 women connected across time to a 1,000-year-old prophecy. Fate and free will collide as they decide between the lives chosen for them or to risk it all and step into the unknown.
Love it.
That is, yeah. So
I read a little bit of it already, and I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. So I think it'll be really, really, really exciting when it comes out. I'm going to buy a copy myself. So that'll be awesome. You guys should definitely do that. We'll have to have you back on when your book comes out so we can drop a link in our show notes so people can grab it right from the show. That'll be fun stuff. Did have a thought, but I don't know what happened to it.
You have about 30 seconds until you're at the runtime of A New Hope.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone who has listened this far.
Yes. So next week we will be watching, this is all for me, so we will be watching the pilot episode of Smallville, and we are going to be talking about Clark Kent and all the things of Smallville, which is one of my favorite childhood shows or teenage favorite shows that I loved so much. And I've been wanting these two to watch it forever. And now I'm going to use the podcast as an excuse to make them watch it.
Perfect.
So if you have any interest in watching that or talking about that or anything related to that, come back and check us out. And of course, check us out live on Substack. Thank you for listening, Jess. Thank you for coming. You did a fantastic job, and it was so awesome to hear your thoughts.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy that I connected with Jared a couple months ago. That I just could tell from his one Reddit post, that you are just an authentic, kind person trying to live your dream out in this world. And it's such a beautiful thing to see One Brilliant Art, how your business is really coming together, and how, just watching it grow has been, just in the last few months that I've known you, has been just a really amazing thing. You guys are putting out such great content. I love reading your newsletters on Substack. And you just have, or your Instagram posts, about the writer's journey and things like that. I love seeing what you guys are putting out there. And I think you have a lot to offer authors in this world.
Thank you so much. That was very kind. Thank you. All right, guys. Well, we will see you next week. Talk to you guys later.
Thanks for listening.